If you're into super old school classic sci-fi or just utterly gorgeous artwork, you'll probably get something out of Memories of Eminon. This manga has a fairly interesting history in that it was originally a short story written by author Shinji Kaijo, which was later adapted into manga by Kenji Tsuruta, who I've talked about before for his manga Wandering Island, which also has really gorgeous artwork and a really cool female protagonist that he likes to draw in states of undress and smoking cigarettes and just generally looking like a badass. And that original manga was just a one-volume story that I remember reading way back in 2008. Having no idea that it would be continued, which I guess the authors didn't either. Going by the afterword later in the manga, it seems that Eminon was just such a popular character that the magazine that Shinji Kaijo had published the original short story through asked him to create more stories starring the character, and he did, and those stories were eventually adapted to manga, and it ended up becoming a continuing series. So whereas this first volume that I'm holding is a retelling of that original 2008 story, the continuing manga from that point forward will cover more stories of Eminon. I have not read any of those other volumes. This one, as far as I could tell, was pretty much the same story I remembered reading way back. But, you know, it's a new printing from Dark Horse. It is labeled as Volume 1, so the show shall go on. Now, it'd be kind of hard to talk about this volume of Eminon without sort of spoiling it, because it's a very simple, straightforward story that mostly exists to just highlight this one really interesting sci-fi conceit that Eminon, the titular character, carries 3 billion years of memories inside of her brain. She remembers everything from being an amoeba all the way up till now, even though she is just a, I think, 17-year-old girl. She was born normally. She's not, hasn't been alive for 3 billion years. She just has a genetic memory passed down through the generations, through different stages of evolution. And she can remember everything going all the way back. She can remember experiences as different people over the years who, also had these memories. And so, that's just all sitting inside her brain. And this all is just kind of explained to a young man who is our protagonist. He's a college-aged kid who's experienced lots of heartbreak. All the girls who he's, fallen in love with have wanted nothing to do with him. He's gotten on this, ferry, I guess, to just head wherever. And he accidentally chance encounters this girl, Eminon. And because he happens to be a big sci-fi fan, this book pays a lot of tribute to particularly Robert Heinlein, a very famous sci-fi author of the 60s and 50s, who is clearly an influence on this book and is also referenced heavily throughout. But, the main character is reading, I think, one of his books, and she basically just decides to tell him the nature of her memories, because he would probably get it. And they have a chit-chat about her nature. I won't spoil where it goes from there, but it's a pretty simple and self-contained story. I mean, you can see it's not very thick, and while there are parts where there's kind of like walls of dialogue when they're having the conversations, a lot of it is just big, pretty spreads of nice looking backgrounds, again showing off Kenji Tsuruta's artwork. I mean, if you read Wandering Island when I talked about it years ago, you'll know that his stories are pretty sparse. It's mostly excuses to draw expansive visages of sea and sky and beautiful girls smoking. So, you're gonna get a lot of that. There's even several parts where they're just is something being communicated without dialogue. There's just montages of images showing the passage of time, or just showing a character's emotions. Lots of color pages in the front and back of the book. So yeah, this is a quick read if you treat it as just a short story. And again, I'm very curious to know where it will continue to. I mean, there's some indication in the back of the book of what the next chapter is going to be like, and it does sound fairly interesting. So maybe I'll give it a go, but there's only been 3 volumes of this continuing Emanon series published. It's been going since 2012. Kenji Tsuruta is a very slow manga artist. If you have been following Wandering Island and you had to wait the year and a half between the volume 1 and 2 releases, even stateside, then you know. He takes his sweet fucking time to bring his pretty images to light. And interestingly, both the author and artist have a lengthy afterword at the end, kind of explaining their history with the series and sort of why it's come back. There's also a long translator note afterward, just kind of, I guess, thinking about the place that this manga has in history and all the sci-fi references that it made, kind of explaining things like how important Robert Heinlein was to Japanese science fiction, telling this story about how he was invited to Go Nagai's wedding, and how Osamu Tezuka showed up at the wedding only after he heard Heinlein was going to be there and came up to him to just basically suck his dick for a while. So all that was pretty interesting in its own right. But yeah, I mean, this manga it's a very charming little story. I think there's a lot of guys who are going to really relate strongly to the protagonist of this story and who are really going to see Emanon as the exact mysterious woman that exists in their own minds that they've been seeking, this is exactly the fleeting love encounter that they either have had or have been dreading the possibility of for much of their life. Also, I should mention, this is set in the 60s. It takes place during the Vietnam War. And so Emanon is kind of presented as that she's supposed to be a hippie chick, but she kind of transcends time as a perennial hipster, cool girl. I can't imagine being a guy who wouldn't be attracted to Emanon, but maybe that's just because I like girls who smoke and drink. But it's a very romantically tinged story. I think if you're someone with a romantic soul, you'll get something out of this. It's actually kind of funny for me reading this now because when I first read it, I was much younger than the main character, and I saw him as I saw him as a little bit older and more worldly than me because he's somebody who's willing to just go out on this adventure, who's had all these, experiences with rejection, and I was a 16-year-old kid who never had a girlfriend, who never really left his house, maybe 17 years old, I guess, because I'm 27 now, but, I think I might have read this in either 2008 or 2009, so it could have been 10 or 11 years ago. But reading it now that I'm much older than the character, I see how the story kind of makes fun of his youth, how it's kind of teasing him for being that very romantic college student kind of character, how he's he's overly serious and straightforward. Emanon kind of teases him, and he doesn't really He takes the things she says too literally, and it's pretty fun. I mean, their character dynamic is good. Again, the bulk of this is just kind of a conversation about the nature of this one sci-fi gimmick, and then it's over. So there's honestly not that much to it, but the tone and vibe is very distinct. It's the fact that it's set in that time period, the fact that the characters are so specific, that they have such a specific encounter, and particularly the ending lends it some emotional gravitas. It ends in a way that kind of lingers in your thoughts, that makes the memory of Emanon stick. So I think that'll probably be the part that hits the hardest. But again, this could have just been a self-contained story, as it was for a long time. It really does not lead itself into the idea that there would be more Emanon. It's hearing that people wanted more of the character is a little surprising to me. I mean, I guess not too much, because that's just how people are. People always just want more of anything they like. But it's surprising that they really had more ideas for it. That there was a continuation to be told. I don't know if it's good. I'm afraid to see. Not that I'm a huge fan of this manga. I think it's good. I think it's an interesting idea. I like the very particular vibe. I like that it has that feeling of I don't know, a French New Wave movie or something. Just a very small story about these couple of characters having a brief encounter. It's, very, again, old school sci-fi short story kind of stuff. But I don't really understand the mindset of somebody who would have wanted this to continue, so I'm a little afraid of, whether it stays good or not. And it is still ongoing, regardless of how slow it publishes. I think the last volume was a few years ago, so, don't expect to be getting regular updates. But, yeah. That's Memories of Eminon. If this sounds up your alley, you should use my Amazon Associates link in the description to buy it, because I get a kickback from that. Only works in the US, but whatever. You can buy this and I'll get money. And on the next episode, I'm going to be talking about an even artsier, even more in my opinion, interesting and esoteric from what I've read so far, manga Children of the Sea. I might be reading this in its entirety because there's only 5 volumes. May recently purchased the first 4. Well, she just bought the 5th one on Amazon, so we're gonna have all 5. So I might read the entire thing just to be complete. This has an anime film coming out that looks fucking insane. It looks awesome. So I'm kind of reading it in anticipation of the movie, and what I've read so far has been really good. So, if you want to be ahead of me and read this whole fucking thing by next week, good luck. The volumes are thick as hell. Good luck to me, I mean. Yeah, you can, buy it with that same Amazon Associates link. Everything you buy after you click the link, I get kickback from. That's it for this episode of Manga Mondays. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next week.